Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which is part of World War II. So, to start off, we're going to talk about World War II. And World War II began when Germany, led by Hitler, invaded Poland in 1939, followed by the Soviet Union's invasion of Poland and the Baltic countries from the east. So, 1939 is when World War II started, and it started because, just like this newspaper says, German troops invade Poland. This is going to be very similar to World War One. Remember, during World War One, the first several years of the war, the United States was neutral. They didn't want to fight, and it's the same thing during World War Two. During the first 2 years of the war, the United States officially stayed neutral, which means the United States didn't want to fight. We didn't take a side. We didn't want to get involved. We were in the Depression. We didn't have a lot of money, so it's not something that we wanted to do. However, Germany defeated France and pounded Britain from the air in the Battle of Britain. And the Battle of Britain is when Germany used planes to continuously bomb Britain. So, if you guys ever saw a map, Britain is an island, and Germany had a very strong air force, so they just continued to drop bombs on Britain over and over again, hoping they would surrender. And in the mid 1940s, Hitler turned on his former partner and invaded the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union is essentially Russia, but Russia expanded. And at first, Germany and Soviet Union were friends, but Hitler, where it says turned on his former partner, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. And despite strong isolationists, which is not wanting to fight, feelings at home, the U.S. increasingly helped Britain by providing war supplies and old naval warships in return for military bases in Bermuda and Caribbean. So the United States, we eventually start helping Britain, and because we helped them, Britain gave us military bases in Bermuda and the Caribbean. And this is the Caribbean right here. It's a sea. It's close to Guatemala, and yeah, it's close to Guatemala, but we got a military base over here, and this small little island right here is called Bermuda. We got a military base over there. And there was a law that was passed called the Lend-Lease Act, and it gave the president authority to sell or lend equipment and weapons to countries to defend themselves against the Axis powers. And so the United States, we were against the Axis powers, which was Germany, and we weren't in the war yet, but we sold weapons and equipment like tanks and airplanes to countries that were fighting the Axis powers. And Roosevelt said this is like lending a garden hose to a next door neighbor whose house is on fire. And the reason why he says it like this, the house is on fire, because Europe was pretty much being destroyed by Germany. Germany was winning almost every single war. In fact, Germany had almost all of Europe during this time. This is just an example of the Lend-Lease Act. U.S. gave $11.1 billion. They gave some shipping stuff, ammunitions, weapons, industrial items, things to make stuff. They also gave some food, like agricultural stuff for the troops. But while this is going on, there's also a war in Asia. And during the 1930s, a militaristic Japan invaded and brutalized Manchuria, and China is an attempted military and economic domination over Asia. So Japan wanted total domination over Asia. They wanted to control everything in Asia, and they started invading countries, and the first two countries they invaded were Manchuria, and they also invaded China. And the U.S. refused to recognize Japanese conquests in Asia and imposed an embargo on exports of oil and steel to Japan. An embargo is when you don't give or sell a country certain items. So we didn't support Japan invading these countries, so we stopped selling oil and steel to Japan. But Japan, I mean, any country, oil is very, very important. You need oil for cars, you need oil for tanks, for planes, and steel is very important as well because you need it for buildings. So the U.S., we put an embargo on it and we stopped selling oil and steel to Japan. And while negotiating with the United States over the embargo and without warning, Japan carried out an air attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 7th, 1941. So Japan, they got tired of negotiating. They were trying to get more oil and steel, so they decided to just attack us. And the attack destroyed much of the American Pacific Fleet and killed several thousand Americans. And it says Pacific Fleet because this is the United States. Most of our boats were in the Pacific Ocean at this time, and that's why it says Pacific. But Japan destroyed most of it, and about 2,400 Americans actually died when Japan attacked us. And Roosevelt called it a date that will live in infamy, as he asked Congress to declare war on Japan. So infamy, think of it as when you're famous, but infamy is when you're famous for doing something bad. So if you murder someone, you'd be infamous because maybe everybody will know you. Yes, you're famous, but you're famous for doing something bad. So December 7th, 1941, Roosevelt says is infamy. It's famous, but for a bad reason. And then he asked Congress to declare war on Japan. So those of you that have taken government already, maybe you know this, but the president cannot declare war. He's not able to start a war with another country. Congress has to declare war. So that's why Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war. And Congress declared war on Japan on December 8, 1941. So just the day after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And this is a photo, part of the photo of the attack on Pearl Harbor. You guys will see a video with some of that as well. And after Pearl Harbor, Hitler honored a pact, which is an agreement with Japan, and declared war on the United States. And debates over isolationism ended, and World War II was officially a world war. And what it says by a pact, that's just an agreement. So Germany and Japan had an agreement that any country that fights them, they were also going to fight. So since the United States said we were going to fight Japan, Germany said, okay, then we're going to fight the United States. So Hitler declares war on the United States. And these are just some of the basics, the Axis powers versus the Allied powers. The Axis powers in World War II were Germany, Italy, and Japan. And the Allied powers were the United States, Britain, the Soviet Union, China, France, and Australia. And these are just the main ones. There was several other countries that helped, even sent troops. For the Axis powers, there's countries like Finland that helped them out, and Romania, but nothing too big. Same thing with the Allied powers. There is actually tons of countries that sent troops. I mean, Brazil sent troops, South Africa sent troops, and lots of countries gave money. El Salvador actually supported the Allied powers. Guatemala supported the Allied powers. Honduras supported the Allied powers. So there was a lot of support for the Allied powers. And it truly was a world war because it was all over the world. And if you guys have any questions, let me know. That's it for today. Bye.